Writing consistently sounds simple, but for most writers, it's the hardest part. Today's conversation is about what it really takes to build a daily writing habit that doesn't burn you out, doesn't kill your creativity, and actually helps you grow as a writer. My guest today has helped thousands of writers show up, write regularly, and rediscover joy in the craft one small story at a time. Julie Duffy is the founder of Story a Day, a global writing community best known for its short story challenges that help writers build consistency without pressure. Her work focuses on sustainable creative habits, short form storytelling, and helping writers move from I want to write to I write. She's been doing this for over a decade, and her approach is refreshingly practical, human, and deeply writer centered. Welcome to the podcast, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, when you think back to your life before Story a Day, what was the tension you were personally wrestling with as a writer?
I was at the time that I started Story a Day. I had written when I was younger,
Okay.
when I was in school, and when they give you
Yeah,
homework, when you're
assignments.
10 or 11 years old, and they're like, go home and write a story, and everyone's grown. And I was like, it's my favorite homework. But then you go through high school and college and all these, and they start making you analyze writing, and suddenly writing becomes really, really difficult because you've got all this like critique stuff in your head
Yeah.
and all these fabulous, perfect works that you've studied and everyone's told you they mean so much. And when you start to write, you're like, well, what? So I kind of stopped writing. And I know I'm not the only person that did that and stopped writing creatively. So when I started Story a Day, I had been at home with my kids for a while. So I wasn't, I didn't have a paid job. I was doing some nonfiction and business writing and magazine writing, but I just had this voice at the back of my head that was going, you always wanted to write stories. So I found myself sitting around with my kids, and I would either be telling them stories because we'd be walking somewhere and they would be whining because their legs are short, and I would be trying to distract them, and I would tell them stories about dragons or, whatever. And like that would catch their interest. Or they'd be playing and I'd have to watch them because like there's a lot of being with little kids. There's a lot of being there but not quite being needed. You're watching to make sure that they don't do something
Yeah.
terrible, but you don't actually, there's nothing for you to do except watch them a lot of the time. So I would find my mind wandering and I'd be daydreaming about stuff. And one day I just had this clarity. I was like, if I'm daydreaming and thinking up all of these random, scenarios and situations and what ifs, I should probably be writing some of them down.
Well,
And that's when I decided it was time to get back to writing and I think that probably applies to a lot of people right now, because with all of the information in the world that we have, all the news coming at us 24 hours a day, and not all of it's good, almost none of it's good, a lot of people are spending a lot of time in their heads thinking what if and feeling powerless and feeling like they're just sort of sitting observing and they can't do anything, but they've got all these ideas running through their head. And what I found was that when you carve out some time to take some of those what if scenarios and put them into fiction, it really helps you calm down or get riled up in the right ways. It feels much more productive. And it's just, it was just such a great thing for me to rediscover. And I think this moment in time is particularly good for people who are creative and have a lot going on in their heads to actually get some of that down on
yeah.
hard.
I'll ask the question again. I say that at what point did you realize, oh, this isn't just about me anymore?
I realized it pretty quickly because I had done some challenges in the past where there were some challenges like NaNoWriMo and the National Novel Writers Month in November, and there was this 100 words challenge that I discovered in the 90s, which was to write 100 words every day for 100 days and to post them on this website. And I knew that those kinds of things, that kind of public accountability, was what helped me do the work. And it also helped kill the perfectionism that was holding me back. And I realized I wasn't finishing anything. So I decided that since I couldn't even finish a single short story, it made sense to me that I would challenge myself to write 31 short stories in 31 days, because I just knew that outrunning the perfectionism was going to be what worked for me. And I I sort of didn't intend it to become what it's become, but I told a couple of friends just for accountability.
Yeah.
And some of those friends were pretty well connected online. And so they told
Yeah.
their friends and they told their friends. And I popped up a website because that's fun for me. And I started the challenge. I said, okay, let's start on May the 1st. And because it rhymes, Story a Day May. And it was like March when I came up with the idea. And so at that point, April was Poetry Month, and I didn't want to steal anything from the poets. So I was like, okay, April, May, let's do Story a Day May. And I told a few people, and like before I knew it, 100 people were like, yeah, I'm in, I'm going
Wow.
to do it with you. So I realized I had to do it.
Wow.
And it's just grown from there.
Yeah. Wow. It's just a start taking opportunity, and as you get started, things just start to multiply, and eventually, like, wow, I never knew that it would.
Yeah, and the thing is, I started that first year. I put out a few writing prompts the first like 3 or 4 days because I thought, well, I'll just give people, sometimes it's good to have someone give you a focus when you're writing something new
Yeah.
every day. And so I did it for 3 or 4 days, but then I found like I was running out of time. I was trying to write my own stories. I was trying to write these things. So I just kind of didn't send one out one day. And I got all these emails from people going, where's the prompt? Where's the prompt? And so I realized that was something that, people needed was a writing prompt, either to react to or to react against. So over the years, one of the things that I've discovered through the challenge is that if you are trying to write more, getting the idea that it's got to be perfect out of your head is intellectually easy, but like emotionally hard to do. So things that impose limits on your writing can be really helpful. So I've done things in the challenge like told people to write a story in 100 words one day, told them to write a story in 40 minutes the next day. And I've had people tell me that they hate writing prompts. I'm never going to use your prompts, they say. And then they come back to me at the end of the month and they're like, yeah, I used the prompts because I was so angry that like I didn't want to write about that thing, but then I dug deep and I
Yeah.
discovered something I never would have written about otherwise. I'm like, okay. So limits and digging deeper than, not relying on your own emotions and finding some way to do that, whether it's a prompt or something else, is quite useful.
Yeah. I noticed that once because especially for things you you're struggling to do, there are multiple decisions to make. You end up not making them, right? This is not just for writing, it's for other
Yeah.
things too. When like, okay, I have to think about what kind of writing should I write? Poetry? Should I write short story? Should I work on the novel? Oh, okay. How long should I write for? 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? Oh, what should the story start with? And then before you know, you spend up the next day trying to decide what to write. But when you have a constraint, not,
Yeah. And that's something that I was just talking about in our community yesterday. Having that, if you want to write more, having a list of multiple things that you could be working on, and like make the decision the night before
yeah,
what you're going to work on tomorrow. And you can be flexible. If you wake up the next day and go, I was supposed to work on the novel today, but I've got this short story idea. You can go with that, but always having something to work on is so much easier than like waking up in the morning and going, what am I going to work on today?
yeah,
And then, like you said, just there's all those paths in front of you, and you can waste half an hour
yeah,
just deciding.
yeah, yeah. A lot of writers, they say they want to write more, and I know I'm part of those writers, but they struggle to do it consistently.
It's easier to do things that we know how to do than to do something that we don't know how to do, and our brains are conditioned by thousands of years of evolution to try and keep us safe. Every creative act that you do is you going down a path that hasn't been flattened down before you by somebody else. Like every story is brand new. Every time you write anything, it's a puzzle that you have to figure out. So it's difficult. And so it's so easy to go, oh, well, I'll just, sharpen my pencils or file all my files or go to the fridge and make breakfast or, whatever it is that you already know how to do. You'll be, I'll just get that out of the way first and then I'll come back to this because you're avoiding doing the writing because the writing is difficult. But the fact that it's difficult is why it's so rewarding. And the fact that it's new
Yeah,
and novel and creative and you're inventing worlds from nothing and you're inventing people out of thin air. And that stuff's difficult. And we're very aware of the fact that a story has to hang together. It has to have good pacing. We have to be compelled by the characters. If it's an essay, it has to have structure. And I think when people talk about writing, they tend to talk about the finished product. We review novels, we review stories, we talk about this essay that we read, and we don't talk an awful lot about the process. But the process is the really rewarding part. The process is the part that happens more often than publishing or showing your work to somebody. I mean, the process is the everyday work of it. So I think that we're impatient to get to the end product, and we have maybe been conditioned to be a bit perfectionist, to be like, this should be brilliant. When people tell you you're a good writer, it's really nice, but what goes into your head is, I'm a good writer. Everything I write should be great. And
Yeah.
it's very, very hard then to allow yourself to do those first drafts, which are messy and imperfect, and to keep going when nobody is applauding you. You're not getting any likes or hearts for turning up and doing the messy work. So, yeah, so it's hard, I think. And I don't think we acknowledge how hard it is. Yes, it's rewarding, but I think we need to face up to the fact that some days you just have to show up, even if it feels like a grind, because the next day you're probably going to find it goes much smoother.
Okay, why is short story such a great entry point for building a writing?
Short stories, they are and they aren't, because some people are natural novelists, right? They have these massive ideas and they have an ability to hold story structure in their head, and they really hate being constrained by short stories. So, to the people like that who don't read short stories, don't like short stories, don't like being constrained, maybe this isn't the best place for you to start. But the beautiful thing about short stories is that they help you to master story structure. Like, we as humans have things that we expect from a story. We expect a certain rhythm. And depending on where you are from in the world, those things vary. Like, there's a very particular sort of Hollywood structure that a lot
Yeah.
of us are used to, but it's grown out of a lot of different types of influences. Whereas if you go and read stories from Japan, they have a different rhythm to them. Just like if you watch a Hollywood film and a French film, but there are still certain storytelling rhythms that people in general expect. And if you start to write a novel, it's very easy to get lost in the novel. Because there's so much going on. There's subplots and all kinds of things that you have to manage. A story is a single storyline, usually one main character with a couple of subsidiary characters that you have to deal with, but there's only really one person's heart that you have to worry about. And so the short story is everything in a smaller scale. So you get to practice elements of short story writing without having to worry about having the story hold up the whole structure of a house. It's like decorating a single room rather than building a whole house. Well, a minute ago we were talking about how it can be difficult to make a decision about what to work on in the morning when you sit down to write, or whenever it is that you sit down to write. And so I came up with this writer's manifesto, which is a tool you can use to figure out really what it is you want to be writing. Because if you're writing for a while, it's very easy to get pulled off course by people telling you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be writing like that person, this is trending, whatever. And I realized one day I was writing a story. I love satire and I love reading satire. But I was trying to write a story like that one day, and it just didn't feel right, because I think there's a certain amount of cynicism that goes along with satire that I just don't really have in me. So I enjoy it when I hear other people, read other people's stuff. I just can't summon it up. So I was trying to write this thing that didn't sit well in my heart. Like, the heart of the story was wrong for me. And it wasn't until I had gone through this exercise of writing my writer's manifesto that I realized that was why that story wasn't working. So what I have people do is I have them think about their favorite writers, artists, musicians, anyone creative that they admire. And then I have them think about what it is in the second step, what it is that they admire about those people. And it can be about their writing or about the way that they live their creative lives. And I get them to write a list of those things. And then I get them to look at it. And usually when people look at that list, they go, oh, yeah, that's what I want to be. I want to be those things. So there are writers that I've got on my list who I admire because of the way that they share with their audience. They interact with their audience at conventions. There are writers I admire on there because they're so individual that you can only get from them what you're getting. And there are other writers that I admire because they strike me as very optimistic. Even when there's darkness in their stories, there's humor, there's optimism, there's hope. And those are things that really resonate with me. And when I looked at my list of people that I admire, there was a lot of that stuff happening. There was a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, a lot of generosity. And I realized that's what I wanted to be doing in my life and in my writing. So once you've figured out what your core values are by looking at who you admire, you get to write a manifesto about your preferred way of living and going about your writing practice. And it can really help with when you're sitting down to write and things don't feel right. You can look at the story you're writing, you can look at the chapter you're writing, you can look at the characters you're putting in and see if they're pulling you off course. Yeah, I mean, not all of your characters are going to live life the way you want to live life, but if your story is coming out dark and cynical and twisted, and that's not how you want to be writing, which you know because you've written it in your writer's manifesto, then you've got a clue as to what you can do to pull your story back on track. Likewise, if you like to write dark and cynical and twisted stories and your story is fluffy because the last thing you watched was a rom-com, you can look at your story and figure out where you went off course because you've got this writer's manifesto that says, in my writing, I want to be these things. I want to do these things. And it can just help to rule out a lot of things that you don't want to be working on and rule in all the things that you do. But like we were talking about before, there's so many ways that you can derail yourself from writing or not get started. And
Yeah.
so I came up with this exercise to help really narrow down what each writer should be working on because it's so individual. And so I run people through this process where I ask them to write down writers, artists, musicians that they really admire, and then to think about what it is that they admire, both about the people and how they live their artistic lives,
Yeah.
and what they admire about their work. And so you'll end up with a list of things like, in my case, there's a lot of people on the list who are prolific. You know, they write a lot. There are people who have a very individual voice. Like you can only imagine Terry Pratchett writing Terry Pratchett stories. Like nobody else could
Yeah.
write a story in his world and I'm going to want to read it, right? It's just not how it's going to be. So that sense of voice is important to me. For me, I found I like things that are optimistic and even if there's darkness in the stories, there's optimism and humor and maybe it's dark humor, but those things are important to me. So as you go through, and then there are other people I admire because of the way that they present themselves in the world. You know, they're generous with advice and fans and all that kind of stuff. So there are things like that that I found. And then I run people through this process. I get them to look at all of that stuff. And you realize that what you admire in other people is really close to your own kind of core values.
Yeah.
But when you're working on something, it can be really easy to be pulled off that because maybe, you know, it's trendy to write dark stories about dystopian sci-fi stuff at the moment. But really what you want to be writing is stuff that's got a bit of light in it. But it can be easy to be pulled off course. So once you look at this list of attributes that you admire about artists and their work, it's easier for you to write a statement for yourself that says things like, I want to work this way. I want to write about these kinds of, you know, things. I want my readers to feel this way when they're reading my stuff. And then as you sit down to write, if something feels off about a project or a character or even a line, you can look at it and go, oh, because I'm trying to be clever and cynical. And what I really want to be is open-hearted and optimistic and funny in general in my work. Or maybe the other way around. Maybe you want to be dark and twisted and cynical and scary, but last night you watched a romantic comedy and like your scene's coming out all fluffy and you can't quite figure out why it doesn't feel right. So you look back at your manifesto and you go, oh yeah, because that's not what I write. That's not what I want to put into the world. Even if I enjoy it when somebody else does it. And so this idea of looking to your fairy art parents and seeing what they bring into the world creatively, and then from that, creating a statement for yourself can be really helpful in ruling things out in your writing life and
Yeah.
ruling things in, because we can't write everything, right? And if you try, if you have all the possibilities in the world, it just becomes overwhelming.
Wow.
And really, why would you want to write? Why would you want to spend all this time and energy on things which aren't dear to your heart?
Yeah. And what is your own writing manifesto?
Mine has a lot of things in it, like in my work, I want to be prolific, generous, open hearted. I want to be always looking for the humor, even in the darkness. And yeah, so it's things like that, and things like prolific was important because I wanted to put that down on paper because it's very easy, like we talked about, to do other things and not actually get the writing done. So I
Yeah.
put prolific up front and open-hearted because it's a vulnerable thing to be writing because you're right. There's so much of the writer in the writing. No matter if you're writing characters that are autobiographical or not, your values are in the writing,
Yeah.
like reminding myself to be open-hearted and not afraid to show that was important. Reminding myself that optimistic is part of my outlook, and it should be in my writing as well. And it's been really helpful for allowing me to abandon some stories that I wasn't enjoying writing and just like move on to something else that I wanted to write more. You do have to finish things, you do have to complete things. You can't abandon everything when they get hard, but there's a sort of there's a filter I can run things through now where I can go, am I just turning away from this because I've got to the tricky bit? Or is this something that just doesn't feel right to me? And it's hard to know that. But with the manifesto in my hand, I can go, oh yeah, I don't like this story because it doesn't match these things that I want to do. So let me write
Yeah.
something better.
Wow. I really love that because the thing is it's about removing the decisions from the heat of the moment. And so
Yeah.
at that point in time, you can just say, yeah, this is the kind of writer I am. And so I'll show up this way. You've helped writers write every day for a month, and you've been doing this for years. You know how they say that, oh, I want to be like you when I grow up. When I started writing and doing some research, I would see your website and I was like, wow, such a great concept. I'd subscribe to the mailing list. And eventually, when I reached out to you and you said yes, I was like, wow, I can't believe she'd say yes.
Of course. I
uh,
mean, but you're
I'm,
you're
I'm,
putting your stuff
I'm
out
just
there as well.
flattered.
Like you're doing this. You're not just thinking about it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm having this conversation in my dream, but maybe someone will wake me up. You've helped writers do this for a while. I think a while shouldn't be the word for over a decade. What usually surprises people most about themselves when they try this, when they do the challenge and they write?
That's such a great question because it really does surprise people that the more they write, the more ideas they get. They're like, I'm never going to be
Mm,
able to come up with a story a day for 31 days. But by about day 5, if they stick, if they're going to stick with it and if they try it and if they actually do it, they we all find that you start wandering through your day, through the world, and all of a sudden you're seeing story ideas because you know you have to come up with something for tomorrow. So there's no
yeah,
like, am I going to write tomorrow? What should I write about? It's just like, I need information. And so the whole world becomes like this rag bag for you to pull things from and build things from. And so people often wait until they're inspired to write, but once you start writing every day, you realize that you cannot run out of ideas. And like the more you use your ideas, the more ideas come, and the more you practice just like writing and getting that invigoration from finishing even a very, very imperfect first draft of a tiny story, that dopamine hit you get from finishing a story makes you crave more and makes you want to come back. So it does get tiring. And I wouldn't recommend anyone try and do it for more than a month. Try and write a new story every day. It's tiring, but it's exhilarating, and it
Well,
teaches people how much more they can do than they thought they could, and that's really fun.
it's like when you try to be a comedian, you give yourself the goal of writing three jokes every day or one joke every day. What happens is that you start seeing the fun in the world, and even though no matter how tragic things might be, you just find a way to to turn those into jokes, and
Yeah,
it's a different lens of seeing the world because now you're like, oh yeah, I laughed. What made me laugh? What did she say that made me smile? Okay, I actually turned that into a joke, and now the
yeah.
world you start seeing noticing a lot of funny things when you do that. For someone who's starting out as a writer, how do we define? I'm using air quotes here. How do we define successful writing? Uh, as a successful writing day for a writer who's just starting out.
I love that question too, because I all very often find myself talking about this idea that you have to define success for yourself. And it's going to look different at different stages. So I love that you framed it that way. Um, a successful writing day is a day when you put some serious effort and time into being in your narrative world, I think. And it doesn't always look like adding words to the page. Sometimes, like yesterday, I went for a walk on my treadmill because it's very, very cold here. So I went for a walk on the treadmill and I didn't put a podcast on or a television show or anything on. I just walked. And as I was walking, you get into the rhythm and I started thinking about I sort of turned my thoughts towards my story. And after I'd been walking for a while, I was like, okay, so I could do that and I could do that. And like, I was just sort of thinking through story problems. And for me, I'm calling that a really successful writing day because I made progress in getting over a problem in a story that's sitting on my hard drive, and I didn't add any words to it, but I started thinking my way through the narrative and through the problems, and I'm like, oh, I think I need to do this next. And I didn't immediately, run home and start typing. I was just like, okay, let me just let that bubble in there for a while. Now, if I do that too often, I can be patting myself on the back and not actually producing anything. So that would then become not a successful writing day. But I think we really do know deep down when we're kidding ourselves on. So like if I don't add any words to that story this week, I'm probably going to be like, oh, come on, Julie, get over. You felt pretty good about yourself the other day, but now we're
Yeah.
just spinning our wheels. So sometimes a successful writing day is when you write and finish a short story in a day. Sometimes it is when you show up and just feels like you're slogging through mud and you read what you wrote yesterday and you look at it and you like add a sentence or two and you feel like it's just not going well and you close down your computer or your phone or whatever and you walk away. That's a good writing day too because you showed up. And a day when you don't, a day when you take a day off can be a good writing day because you go out into the world and you wander around and you listen and you see things and you're not consciously thinking about your writing, but you're going to come back to it tomorrow. So you're just like your antenna are out and like you were
Yeah.
saying about the jokes, you're just looking for stuff. So I think we have to have multiple definitions of a successful writing day. But if you're just starting out, you do have to put words on the page more often than not, maybe during the week, not every day, but show up, open the project, put some words down, and I think finishing things, even if they're imperfect, even if you have like a whole mess in the middle of the story,
Yeah.
writing to the end of the story and putting an ending on it is a massive success because it teaches you what each particular story wants to be. I think when you get to the end of the story, there's a moment where you go, oh, that's what this
Oh,
story is about, right? So you do have to finish things as well. Starting things I was going to say it's easy. Starting is not always easy, but starting is easier than pushing through and finishing. So yeah, start things, but push through and finish some of them as well. But don't berate yourself if your successful writing day doesn't involve putting words on the page.
Well, what does finishing often teach writers that endless drafting never does?
Well, finishing a story helps you, excuse me a sec.
Bless you.
Finishing a story helps you to see the shape of the story. It helps you if you're talking about creative writing, fiction, narratives, and even if it's like a scene for a memoir or something, like just learning that process of having a beginning, a middle, and an end, and feeling the rhythm of that and the pacing of that, you can continue writing incidents, things that happen to your character. You can keep writing that stuff forever and ever and ever and ever. And you're not really telling a story, you're just sort of telling a series of events. And a story or, a crafted piece of creative nonfiction or even nonfiction, it has a structure to it. And sometimes it's hard to find that structure. So you have to keep going until you hit the end so that you can then go, okay, now I know the shape of the rest of this story. Maybe you can then see that where you started the story isn't where it needs to start. And you can
Yeah.
chop off, a scene at the beginning, or you can add a scene at the beginning, or you can just feel the shape of it better once you've got to the end.
Earlier on you talked about short stories as a starting point for writing. A lot of writers see short stories as a stepping stone, not a destination. How do you think about the value of short fiction?
Yeah, I love short fiction, but I really like short fiction when it's at its I think it's at its best when it's being weird. So it's not like a mini novel where, your character gets up in the morning, goes out, does something, comes home, and it feels like a novel without all the other stuff that we like about novels,
Yeah,
all the subplots and I like it when I think short fiction excels when because it can do things. It can do things that you can't do in a novel. The form can be weird. You can have multiple narrators and just jump back and forth between their perspectives in in ways that would be frustrating if it was in a novel.
bless you.
Excuse me. So yeah, so short fiction, it can do things that you could never sustain for 300 pages. You can write a story in memos. I read a story the other day that was um, it was a social services report. So it was like laid out like a memo in an office, and
Yeah,
there was like bureaucratic jargon in the bottom.
yeah,
But if you read between the lines, you understood there was a story about a woman who was going through something in there. And
yeah,
like you could never go through 300 pages of that. That would be a nightmare. Short fiction can really just give you a moment with a character. It can give you a puzzle. It can give you a sort of like a punch in the gut emotionally, and it's something that you couldn't that works differently from how novels work. So a lot of times when you start writing short stories and you show them to people, people try and compliment you by going, "Oh, this would be a great first chapter of a novel," or "I want to read
yeah,
more about these characters." Which is a compliment, but you also get to say, "No, this is all you're getting. I'm glad you want to know more
yeah,
about these characters. Job done." You know? That's
yeah.
like a successful short story as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I love that. What are some skills you think that writing short stories help writers develop?
Everything. I mean, I think all of the skills that you need if you want to write something longer are in there. You in it it's it's like almost you have to be very conscious of language with short stories because you've got so few words to do what you want to do, to create that emotional punch, to paint a whole life and then like take us into one moment in that life. So you need to be able to know what your character's past is, what drives your character without needing to write all of that into the story. You don't have time to do all the backstory the way you do in a novel, but you still need to
Yeah,
know that stuff about your character so that they feel real. You have to be able to paint a world, a setting, a room in moments. And all of these things, being able to do these things in a concise way is going to be useful later if you're writing something longer or, another day when you're writing something longer. You can write more detail and be more lush and allow people to sink into your world if you're writing something longer. But to be able to paint a scene in a single sentence is going to stand you in really good stead if you're writing an action scene in your 400-page novel and you just want to let people know that you're in a forest. And you could, as a short story writer, you're practiced in the art of sketching a scene and immersing people in a place and a time and a moment in a very few words. So where you need the pace to go quickly in a story, you're always going to have that skill in your pocket. You're going to know about pacing and tension and conflict, about choosing the right word, and about how to say something in a very concise way, which clearly I'm not good at when I'm talking, but I am very good at like cutting out words in a short story and realizing that you don't have to say she was thinking about going to the store. You can just say she, the store's doors slid open. There's ways to be concise that you have to learn in short fiction that you can then use in longer pieces as
Yeah.
well. But I think the
Wow.
key is that sense of being able to knowing that you can start and finish something is also something that is a really good confidence builder that you can use with
Yeah.
short fiction.
Completing works gives progress. What I like about short fiction is experimenting is not expensive, right? Unlike a novel, if you try to like write,
Yes.
you have to write 100,000 words, and now you have to, in order to experiment with a different point of view, you have to write another 100,000 words. That's a lot.
Absolutely. You could find different points of view you like. You can try tones. You can, try writing something cynical. You can try writing something funny. You can have an idea about a character and be like, does this work? And you just write one story about them. It's, yeah, yes, I'm glad that you raised that because that's one of my favorite things is that you just get to experiment. And like you say, it's low cost. You're not spending 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 5 years on one
Yeah.
idea that might not work out.
Yeah, well, what would you say? Because a lot of times when we talk about short fiction, writing short stories and writing consistently, some of the objections that writers have is, I feel like my writing isn't good enough yet. Should I still be writing every day?
The everyday thing is a good question. I don't think you have to write fiction every day. I think you should still be writing. And again, every day is not necessarily right for everyone. I know I've seen those things where people are like, oh, like I think Jerry Seinfeld said, you got to write a joke every day and then like, cross it off on the calendar. So you've got that streak. There are certain personalities, mine included, where if I try and do that, something in me starts to rebel and I'm just looking for an excuse to break the streak so that I don't feel like I'm in jail, and in like, so if I promise to write every day, I don't, okay, here's a secret that is not really a secret. I don't write a story every day in May
Okay.
because over the
Wow.
years, I've discovered that I get really unhappy if I don't get a day off. So I give myself Sundays off. And it started when my kids were quite little. And even now, my kids are out the house, but, my husband's still here. And I just want a day where I don't have an obligation. So my own challenge, I have failed, I think, forever since 2010. But that's why
Wow.
I tell people you should always make your own rules. And in your rule that you set for yourself, so going more back to your question, should you be writing every day? If you feel like your writing's not good enough, you should be writing more often than you want to. And it should be more days than you're not writing. But you get to take days off because sometimes writing is being out in the world, walking around. And as long as you consciously turn your thoughts to your writing and your creative life, some of your writing days can be that. But yes, you should be writing a lot because it warms you up. It gets the phrases flowing. But you should also be reading a lot because that gets good stuff into your head. So read widely, read nonfiction, read stories, read stuff that you love. Don't just read stuff that people tell you should be reading, the classics and the literary stuff. Read stuff that really lights you up. But yes, write a lot. You have to keep writing. See the volume cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to make it a priority, but I think that's, yeah, like I just said, you don't have to write every day. You don't have to be adding words to the page. Sometimes your writing time is going to be revision. Sometimes it's going to be thinking. So I think the mindset shift is just that there's no rush. And I know that sounds weird for somebody who put together this challenge, which is write a story every day for a month. Hurry, 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 you know? But I actually think what we've all learned in the challenge and over the years is that there's no rush, and creativity responds to space and safety. And so just be nice to your inner writer, show up for them, know that you're going to be doing this well, as long as you're breathing. I mean, you're not going to be able to give this up. You're going to pretend you can give it up, but you're not. You're going to keep coming back to it. So you might as well just keep going, keep pushing through the times when it's hard, keep showing up. Yeah, sometimes it's not going to be perfect and you're going to hate your writing, but over the long haul, don't panic. Do your work, show up, make it a priority, because nobody is going to give you permission for this and nobody is going to tell you, nobody's going to ask for your writing. But when you give it to them, they're going to be delighted. So there are people out there who will love your writing, but you don't need to finish it today. You don't need to find them tomorrow. You're going to be doing this as long as you're alive. Um,
Yeah.
so be kind to your inner and just keep showing up. Yep, still going. We started in 2010, so this is year 16 or 17, I guess, if you count the first year as one. But yeah, so it'll be running again in May, and I'll put prompts up every day. Sometimes, some years I have guests, prompters who, you know, are working writers who send me prompts. Sometimes I write them all myself. I think this year's going to be a year with guest prompters, and sometimes I have like extra materials around the challenge that people can opt into. But yeah, we'll be there May the 1st, writing stories every day. They can come over to storyaday.org, where all the information, all the past year's prompts are. And I've set up a page at storyaday.org/build writing for your listeners if they want to get a hold of that Writer's Manifesto workbook and try out the exercise for themselves. Beautifully put. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Build Writing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and share it with a friend who loves poetry and creative writing. Leave us a quick review or rating. It really helps others find the show. You can also connect with me, and I'd love for you to subscribe to the newsletter. He's saying all the behind the scenes things I'm experimenting on and things I'm working on in terms of creative writing. Yeah, it'll mean a lot to me. And I share the writing prompts, behind the scenes, speaks, and more. Yeah, a lot of things. And if you have any questions or ideas, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be sure to respond. Love to hear from you. Next week, we'll be diving into something really, really amazing. And you have to tune in next week to find out what that will be. Until next time, keep writing, keep building your craft. See you next time.